Thank you for listening to The Luminous Mind. Remember to subscribe to our free podcast so you won't miss any of our illuminating content. Here is episode 161.
Now, a go-giver is someone whose focus is on providing value or giving value to others.
Benjamin Franklin once said, "Do not curse the darkness, rather light a candle instead." If you're ready to set your mind on fire, then prepare yourself for the Luminous Mind with your host, Rebecca Bowman.
Today's fire starter is Bob Burg. Bob is a sought-after speaker at company leadership and sales conferences, sharing the platform with everyone from today's business leaders and broadcast personalities to even a former U.S. president. Bob is the author of a number of books on sales, marketing, and influence, with total book sales of well over 1 million copies. His book, The Gogetter, co-authored by John David Mann, has sold over 500,000 copies and has been translated into 21 languages. It has been released in a new expanded edition with a foreword by Huffington Post founder and publisher Arianna Huffington. Bob is an advocate, supporter, and defender of the free enterprise system, believing that the amount of money one makes is directly proportional to how many people they serve. He is also an unapologetic animal fanatic and serves on the board of trustees of Furry Friends Adoption and Clinic in his town of Jasper, Florida. Welcome, Bob.
Well, thank you, Rebecca. How great to be with you.
It's so fun. After talking with Kevin Clayson, he gave a strong endorsement of your book. And so I'm so excited to have illuminating conversation with you about your book, The Gogetter. But before we get into all of that, can you please tell our audience a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. Well, I was extremely blessed to be born to two wonderful parents. And my first career, if you will, out of college was as first a radio broadcaster and then a television newscaster. I wasn't very good at that, though. I was pretty good on radio because I did sports, but I went into television news because it was the only opening I could get to go into television, and I thought I could sort of, from there but it really wasn't my thing. And I graduated into sales from broadcasting. And the funny thing was, as I began to learn more about sales and reading books on it and attending seminars, I started to realize that really selling was really an inside job. It was learning about yourself. And I started reading books such as, Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich, and David Schwartz's Magic of Thinking Big, and all these wonderful books on personal development. And I started building myself on the inside. And it's when we build ourselves and grow on the inside, it manifests on the outside. And so the greatest thing for me about being a sales professional was not only learning how to sell, but really was learning how to grow.
That's awesome.
And from there, I ended up being a sales manager of a company, and from there started sharing what worked for me, and eventually it sort of morphed into a speaking career.
Oh, that's great. Well, and we were talking about before we started recording how we always hear the term go-getter, but wondered how that's different than a go-giver. Maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, it's funny. It seems as though a go-getter would be the opposite of a go-giver. But we don't, when I say we, I mean John David Mann, my awesome co-author of the Gogetter series, because the Gogetter is a business parable. It's basically a work of fiction, and he's a fantastic writer. I'm more of a kind of a how-to, step 1, step 2, step 3 type of person. So, but we often say, John and I will both say that we love go-getters because go-getters get things done. They take action. And you and I both know that you can have the greatest ideas, the best thoughts, the very best of intent. But unless action is put into the mix, nothing's going to happen. So we encourage people to be go-getters. Fortunately, there is no natural division between a go-getter and a go-giver. Now, a go-giver is someone whose focus is on providing value or giving value to others. It's a shift in focus, a move from an I focus or me focus to an other focus. So we like the idea of someone being both a go-getter, a person of action, and a go-giver, someone whose focus is on bringing value to others. What we don't want to be people to be, and what we say is the opposite of a go-giver, is a go-taker. And that's that person, Rebecca, who feels almost entitled, if you will, to take without having added value to the other person, to the situation, to the marketplace, if you will. And so we encourage people to be both go-getters and go-givers, but not go-takers.
That's great. Well, and you can kind of feel those people, right? When you approach them, there's kind of that feeling of like they're just here to get something from me. It's definitely a feeling that you can get. But I want to hear a little bit maybe more about the journey that led you to what you've kind of turned into your passion of go-giving.
Well, it's interesting. Again, very fortunate to have been brought up by a couple of people who embody what the word go-giver means, although it's not a word I would have thought of at the time, but people who are always bringing value to everyone whose lives they touched. And so great example. And, it's the best kind of example you can have, right? When you get to live with that kind of example. And yet, you know how it is with kids. You kind of sometimes move away from that. And, you forget some of those things. You don't really forget, but you kind of, you're a kid. And so sometimes you rebel a little bit. And, I think what happened was with me was I started maybe sometimes when I got out into the world, listening to and watching some examples of people who seemed to have it all together, but really, really didn't. And I remember, and this is as I was, maybe a couple of years into sales and starting to do well, but not nearly realizing my potential. And I came back to the office of the company I was selling for, and there was a gentleman there, an older gentleman. And what's funny is this is probably 35 years ago. So when I say older gentleman, he was probably my age now, but back then he seemed like an older gentleman. And he said to me, "Burg, can I give you some advice?" And I said, "Sure." I've always been, lucky that way. I've been always open to advice when someone says something. Doesn't mean I always listen to it, but I'll always consider it, right?
Yeah.
And I said, "Sure." And he said, "Burg, if you want to make a lot of money in business," actually, he said, "if you want to make a lot of money in sales," he said, "don't have making money as your target. Your target is serving others. Now, when you hit the target," he continued, "you'll get a reward. That reward will come in the form of money, and you can do with that money whatever you'd like. But never forget, the money is simply the reward for hitting the target. It's not the target itself. Your target is serving others." And that made a huge difference to me. And it really brought me back to the way I'd been brought up. And I'd said that just made so much sense. And, this is why often John David Mann and I will say that money is simply an echo of value. It's the thunder, if you will, to value's lightning, which means in the business context, the focus must be on providing value to others. In fact, in a free market-based economy, and when I say free market, I simply mean no one is forced to do business with one another. No one's forced to buy or sell to or from one another, but people willingly choose to exchange with one another. In a free market-based economy, it ensures that the salesperson or business person will focus on pleasing the customer. Because remember, in a free market, no one's forced to buy from you. They're not going to buy from you because you have a quota to meet, because you need the money, because you want to make the sale, or because you're a nice person who has a product you think they'd like. They're only going to buy from you because they feel that it's in their best interest to do so. And that's okay. That's the way it should be. It means that we understand that we must focus on bringing value to others. The interesting thing is this works in all sorts of relationships, not just in the business relationship.
That's so great. And kind of going back to that go-giver, go-getter versus the go-taker
right?
that we talked about earlier. Give us kind of the challenges that you had along the way when you're first trying to implement this idea.
I don't think there's a challenge in trying to implement it once you understand why it works so well. Because people will say, Well, I can understand this go-giver thing, right? Focus on bringing value to the customer once you're already successful and don't need, the money so badly. Then you can focus on them, right? And so the premise here, the false premise, if you will, is that by focusing on yourself or focusing on the money, as though that's actually going to help you make money faster than doing it this way. And it's just not so. And let me explain why, if I may. Let's say you are the salesperson, okay? Let's say you are the entrepreneur, the business person, and you are presenting your product or service to a potential buyer. And you do this the way that, that you've always heard it's done, that you think of yourself and you just focus on the money and the numbers, right? Well, again, remembering why this person's going to buy because they believe it's in their best interest to do so. If you go in there with the attitude that really all you care about is the transfer of money from their pocket to yours, so you're totally focused on yourself, you're focused on the money, you're not really focused on bringing value to them, they can sense it, whether consciously or unconsciously. Yeah. It's going to totally come across.
Yeah, and we talked about that earlier. I mean, yeah, you do sense that, definitely.
Right, and they're going to be less likely to do business with you now. On the other hand, when you come across to this person, when you are totally, absolutely, unabridgedly focused on them and bringing value to them, you ask questions and you listen simply to understand so you know what it is that they want, what they need, what they desire, and how you can then connect the benefits of your product or service with their wants, needs, and desires. Now they understand that, and the trust factor is much higher, and they understand why it's in their best interest to buy. They're going to buy from you a lot quicker than if you were focused on yourself and focused on the money.
Yeah, it's kind of the used car salesman feeling versus, somebody who, you really trust and all of a sudden they become a friend to you and you're going to listen to what they've got to say, correct? Is that?
Sure, absolutely. See, here's what selling really is, because so often selling is defined incorrectly. People think selling is about trying to convince someone to buy something they don't want or need. That's not selling. That's actually being a con artist, but it's not selling. Selling is simply defined as discovering what the other person wants, needs, or desires and helping them to get it. That's what selling is. And so when you do it that way, which is how a go-giver would do it, you are going to make more money, you're going to make more money faster, and you're going to be sustainably profitable.
Yeah. Long term, I mean, people come back to you and you're not going to have to search them out as much, right. Correct?
And they refer you to others. Absolutely.
That's great. Well, tell me, with all the time and experience that you've had working with the go-getters, go-givers, what do you feel like your overall paradigm change has been?
Well, it's understanding that the world, most people, okay, most individuals would like to believe that you can do business this way. And because of the messages we get from the world, okay, from the media, from television shows, from a lot of movies, you'd think that there are two types of people, the good people and the wealthy people, right? Mm-hmm. And that to be successful in business, to make a lot of money, you must be the ruthless, horrible, terrible, right? And of course, that's not correct. There are all sorts of people, obviously, in the world, so it's a big world. We can't say everyone, but again, the more free market the economy is, where, again, people are not forced to buy from one another, the more that you can only succeed if you act this way, if you bring value to others. And, typically, it's the people who truly want to bring value to others. They believe in their product or service. They want to help others. They want to add value to the world. And people want to be this way. People want to know they can do business this way. And I think that's what happened with the book when it first came out. The early adopters of this book, of The Go-Giver, were people who were already very successful, not the people who needed the book. It's the people who were already living their lives this way and conducting their business this way. And they would email John and they'd email me and they'd say, this is what I've been trying to tell people, right? And sometimes, it's that third party through a book or through whatever that people will listen to. And then the next wave of adopters were the people who were maybe given the book by those people who they had respect for and who didn't know, yes, this is how you do business. You do it by focusing not on ourselves. You do it by focusing on others. So the paradigm shift is, yes, we can be good, well-meaning, well-intended people who have a desire to bring value to others, a mission to help people know the benefits of our product or service, and not despite this, but because of this, we can also earn a very high income.
That's great. Well, before my audience is wondering if, I've totally changed the whole programming of my podcast, let's kind of talk about your education curriculum. Part of this book is that you have created a resource that teachers can use as a curriculum and it's called a curriculum for making a difference. That's the subtitle for it. How do you feel like that could be implemented into, teaching students, and especially, into like our homeschooling realm of creating entrepreneurs out of our kids, or hopefully we are entrepreneurs ourselves?
Sure. Well, the book, The Gogetter, the book itself is a business parable. And while it's a life story, life lesson, as well as business lesson, it's written for the entrepreneur out there, basically, the entrepreneur, the leader, what have you. Well, we had a lot of teachers, educators who read the book, who enjoyed it. And one in particular, his name is Randy Stelter. He's the athletic director and an English teacher and longtime coach and educator from Valparaiso, Indiana, works at Wheeler High School there. He called and asked, after he read the book, he asked if he could devise a curriculum for it. And, we talked to him about it and we worked through it with him, but he basically came up with it. And what he started doing, by the way, was teaching the book to his students, to his entire senior class. And he devised the curriculum. John and I went through it. And then so we ended up publishing just last year the teacher's guide. It just has worked out really well. We've had a whole lot of teachers in public schools or government schools, as well as, people, whether it's homeschooled or whether it's people privately teaching, what have you, that have adopted this. And we're just really pleased about it because it's the principles themselves that really come through. It's not that it has to be for any one person. And so this is just as applicable to kids in high school or middle school as it is to an adult. Yeah. Now, we think that there's going to be more homeschooling organizations and homeschoolers who utilize the teacher's guide than there will be public schools or government schools, for obvious reasons. This is much more off the beaten path. This is much more for people who are independent and who, have that entrepreneur mentality. And so, we believe in time that's going to happen. But it's been fun to see all the educators that have, really dipped their toes into this and grasped it and enjoyed it.
Well, and that's kind of an American thing in a way, right? The entrepreneurial spirit.
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely.
It's at the heart of our nation. And so hopefully all those educational philosophies kind of all come together and create that entrepreneurial type of spirit. But let's kind of get a little bit more like into your book then. And let's quickly review those 5 laws that you share in the book and how those apply to entrepreneurialism.
Sure. Well, the 5 laws themselves are the laws of value, compensation, influence, authenticity, and receptivity. And when we speak in the business sense, the law of value says your true worth is determined by how much more you give in value than you take in payment. Now, this can sound a bit counterintuitive. Give more in value than I take in payment. I mean, my goodness, aren't I going to go out of business? How do I make a profit? So for this, we simply need to understand the difference between price and value. Price is a dollar figure. It's a dollar amount. It's finite. It is what it is. Value, on the other hand, is the relative worth or desirability of something, of a thing, to the end user or beholder. In other words, what is it about this thing, this product, service, concept, idea that brings so much in worth or value that someone will be willing to exchange their money for it and be glad they did while you make a healthy profit? And let's say, for example, a young man or young woman is 15 or 16 or 17 years old, and they decide to have a car detailing business so they can make some extra money. And what they do is they explain, obviously the benefits and they find out what this person's looking for them to do and how they want the car to look and what's particular. and they charge, I don't know, let's say $75. Okay, that's the price, the $75. But what value are they providing in exchange? Well, first of all, a very, very clean, immaculate, spotless exterior and interior, which right there is obviously worth more to the buyer than the $75 they paid, or they wouldn't have done it, right? So that's the first thing. But they also gave great service. They had a very friendly, appreciative attitude. They're also, what else are they giving that person? They're giving that person convenience, that person doesn't have to do it themselves. They're giving them a feeling of pride in that they're now driving around a car that looks great, okay? And so they're doing all these, this is all the value that's above the $75. So when you do this, this person's saying to themselves, hey, you know, and now they're not saying this out loud. They're saying this maybe on an unconscious level, but wow, I'm really happy with this. This was worth much more than the $75 that I paid. And of course, because your supplies cost you less than the $75 and the time you took, you were willing to lease that out for, you also made a very, very healthy profit, which you should.
Well, and I really love the idea that you started with something kind of simple that like a student could do, because, you know, you really think about value. Sometimes we think about it, well, it's got to be something expensive that I've created for somebody else. But really value, I mean, in selling yourself to the value that you can create. I mean, do you have any suggestions for maybe how young people, or, you know, even us, the older people that are trying to create value, you know, without costing much money?
Sure. And really, it doesn't have to cost much money, because whatever job you do for someone, and this is, by the way, let's say you have a job part-time in a pizza restaurant as a 16-year-old. Well, who's your main customer? Well, you've got two customers, the end users, of course, who are the diners, but also your employer. And your employer is going to employ you only because they feel they're getting more in value from you than what they're paying. So not only do you do a great job as far as serving the pizza, bussing the tables, cleaning up, doing whatever it is you're doing, but you do it with, you always have a smile on your face. You get to work early and you leave a little bit late. You make sure that you're not just standing around, but you make sure to do things that other people maybe aren't doing. You're making sure the place is spotless. Again, you always have that great attitude. The ways to add value to any transaction, well, there's probably hundreds of ways to communicate value, but they tend to come down to 5 what we call elements of value. And they are excellence, consistency, attention, empathy, and appreciation. And to the degree that you display these, this is the degree that you totally separate yourself from others. And by the way, when someone comes into this restaurant and you greet them, you don't say, how you doing? You say, good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, okay? When someone thanks you, you never say no problem. You don't even say you're welcome, you say my pleasure. Those are the little things that you do in order to separate yourself from everyone else. And how you do anything is how you'll do everything. So you want to make sure to get into great habits. You know, so these are the things we can do, but it's treating people with courtesy, with kindness, with respect. You know, these are all the things we can do that add value to the transaction and takes it from being a transaction to an experience.
I love the change in the attitude of the difference between no problem and my pleasure, because that
Absolutely.
does, you know, then people feel like they have been valued, or they feel important.
Exactly.
So, it reminds me, my husband and I were at a restaurant. We sit down and the guy brings us he does his job. He brings us the appetizer and the drinks and stuff. And then we say, well, how are you doing? He's like, well, I'd be better if people would stop coming in here.
Oh,
and my husband, yeah. I mean, he did everything he could, but then like the attitude, like you said, putting yourself in a situation where you're creating habits. And I think that's one thing we don't realize. I mean, that young person had no idea who we were. I mean, we could have been the next opportunity waiting for him. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's also what happens. See, you have this attitude, the great attitude, the value-based attitude, the above and beyond attitude. You do this because it's who you are. And because it's who you are, it's what you do. But when you do that, you make yourself more valuable to the marketplace, to your employer or to your customers, and to that person who you don't even know that they're watching you, and you never know what that next opportunity could be.
Exactly. Great. Before we go on, let's listen to this message. Changing a paradigm takes some study, but like me, you are probably super busy. That's why we've teamed up with Audible. Go to our website, theluminousmind.net. Get a free month of Audible with 2 audiobooks, thousands of titles in exchange for only books that you absolutely love. You too can be learning on the go to keep that fire burning. Welcome back to The Luminous Mind with Bob Burg, author of The Gogetter. Well, in The Gogetter, you say the Gogetter philosophy is totally congruent with human nature, but I think a lot of the things that we're talking about are actually many things that we fight against. What are some ways that we can help to implement that and to make it a little bit more easy? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think what it is when I say it's congruent with human nature, first, because most people, they want to be of value to others. Most people want to make a difference. They want to live a life of meaning. People want to be happy. As a human being, our main motivation actually is happiness. But what is happiness? Well, I would define, happiness as an ongoing feeling of joy and peace of mind, the result of living congruently with our values. So when we value honesty, integrity, bringing value to the marketplace, being a good human being, this fits right in to what a go-giver would be. But when we say congruent with human nature, it also means in the way we deal with others. Dale Carnegie, who wrote the fantastic book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, written back in 1937, and it's just as viable today as it was back then because human nature really doesn't change. And what I believe was the underlying premise of his book was where he said, ultimately, people do things for their reasons, not our reasons.
Yeah.
So we need to realize that when we're dealing with other people, they are doing things consciously and or unconsciously for their reasons. So if we want them to want to work with us, we've got to understand that they're doing things for their reasons. And this is why a great leader, a great influencer, a great salesperson constantly ask themselves questions such as, how does what I'm asking this person to do, how does it align with their goals? How does it align with their wants, needs, and desires? How does what I want this other person to do align with their values? And when asking ourselves these questions thoughtfully, intelligently, genuinely, authentically, not as a way to manipulate another human being into doing our will, but as a way of building everyone in the process, now we've created the environment for that great relationship to take place, where people want to do business with us. They want to get to know us. They want to be in friendship or relationship with us. They want to refer business to us. So we've generally got to care about bringing value to them. I love what Simon Sinek, in his book, Leaders Eat Last, wrote about trust. He wrote that trust is a biological reaction to the belief that someone has our well-being at heart. And so we need to genuinely care about people who we are dealing with.
That's great. And that's one of the things when we were talking about earlier with the values and being a person who, we're all creators. We're all people who want to, like you said, bring some sort of, have a value place in this world. One of the things that you talk about in your book is also influence. We want to be a person who other people want to listen to. And we talk about a lot about with trust, that definitely creates that influence. But how does a go-giver create influence? I mean, we kind of talked about with trust, but, how can we do that both personally and, within our work?
Sure. Well, let's take a look at what influence really is. On a very basic level, I believe you can define influence simply as the ability to move a person or persons to a desired action. usually within the context of a specific goal. On a bit deeper level, we could say that influence is an unseen flow of power. And while both definitions work, I don't believe that either one really captures its essence. In my opinion, the essence of influence is pull. Pull as opposed to push. You never hear someone say, wow, that Dave or that Janet, she is so influential. She has a lot of push with people, right? They'd say she's influential. She has a lot of pull with people. And I believe that's what influence is. Great influencers attract people to themselves and then to their ideas. And they do that, again, not through pushing themselves on others, pushing their will on others or their ideas, or being push-y, but through pull, drawing people to them. You know, it's the difference between trying to influence or lead through compliance, right? Or through earning that person's commitment. And again, we do that through pull, and we do this through building trust. I have a saying that I have used since whenever, and that is that all things being equal, people will do business with and refer business to and allow themselves to be led and influenced by those people they know, like, and trust. So, you know, how do we become an influencer? Well, you know, it's interesting. What we have to offer to make ourselves more, you know, attractive or pull-y as opposed to push-y, pull-y, you know, what we have to offer, we give least of all through what we say, though what we say is also very important. It's important to be kind and to be tactful and to be able to be honest, but in a way that you can help build someone. What you say is important, but it's the least important of all. More important than what you say is obviously what you do. You know, we know that. But more important than what you say and what you do is who you are.
Yeah.
And that, I believe, is where character comes into play. Character comes from an old Greek word meaning scrape or scratch. It came to mean an engraved marking and eventually a defining quality. I believe that the sum of all our qualities is our defining quality or character. And the interesting thing about someone of high character is that you know they stand for something, and you tend to know exactly where they stand. You also know where you stand with them. And because of this, you don't necessarily have to agree with all their decisions, but you know it's based out of honesty, it's based on integrity. Now, this does not mean that people of high character don't make mistakes. Of course they do. They're human. It doesn't mean that they don't course correct. They absolutely do. It also doesn't mean that they're not flexible on strategy. Sure they are. You've got to be. But when it comes to those values-based decisions, they are absolutely immutable, immovable, and unchangeable. And that's why we trust them so much. And when we trust them, they have influence with us.
Yeah. And they say most millionaires have, 100% impeccable integrity. Mm-hmm. That they are who they are regardless, right, and will stick with that, regardless of how much money is thrown at them as well. Mm-hmm. So let's kind of talk about like the law of authenticity. It sounds like, as we're trying to give and we're trying to be a person of value, sometimes we want to be happy. We want to be happy doing what we want to do. But sometimes in giving somebody value, I think that maybe there's a misconception that we somewhat need to be a doormat, that we need to do whatever the customer says or whatever your boss wants you to do. I mean, of course, we have to have some integrity like we talked before, but, how does a person that's a go-giver tell somebody that they don't want to do something?
Right. Well, that's a wonderful question. So I want to definitely communicate and make sure to qualify the fact that being a go-giver has absolutely nothing to do with being anyone's doormat, with being a martyr, or with being self-sacrificial in any way, shape, or form. Absolutely not at all. Being a go-giver simply means you understand that shifting your focus from getting to giving, shifting your focus from getting to giving meaning, again, constantly and consistently providing value to others, to the marketplace, is not only nice, it's also very, very profitable. And whenever we can, of course, we want to please the customer. But that doesn't mean the customer is always right. And it doesn't mean we should be at anyone's beck and call, or that we should be jumping through hoops in a way that's not correct, that's not appropriate. We have to say no to people. In fact, when you're a go-giver, you tend to be very, very successful, which means more and more people want your time and want you to do things that you cannot take the time to do without giving up something that you shouldn't be giving up. You know what I'm saying? So you've got to be able to say no. So let's take a different scenario here. Let's say that someone is asking you to serve on a committee, okay? And you don't want to serve on this committee, or for whatever reason it is, you just don't want to, and that's fine. That's your business, your reason. And let's assume there is not some moral imperative that you do so. It's perfectly reasonable for you to not do so, okay? So the best answer is to not do so. But how do you do this in a way that you don't offend the other person and you're able to maintain your integrity? I've often heard people say it's become the politically correct thing, and I've heard so many people give this advice, and I must say I disagree with it, and that is that people will say, just tell people no, you don't want to. No, here's what they'll say. No is a complete sentence, as though you're just supposed to say to someone, no, not really. Is that true? Are you somebody asks you a legitimate thing, they ask you to serve on a committee or to do something that you don't want to do. Are you really just going to say no? Well, first of all, it's rude. It's not polite. You're making an enemy out of someone there's no need to. They're not going to ask you to do anything ever again, and you may want to do things with them in the future. But really, the main reason you're not going to respond like that is because it's not congruent with your value system of treating people with kindness and respect. So I don't believe I know what they're saying, but I disagree that saying no like that is appropriate. I also think it's counterproductive. So the other way, which people will suggest, which again, I'm going to say in advance I disagree with, is to kind of tell a little fib. Just say, I would, but I'm too busy. The challenge I have with that, Rebecca, is that
your integrity.
in a couple of different ways. One is in your own mind, because it's not that you're too busy, it's that you really don't want to do it. In other words, you place more value on not doing it than on doing it. As human beings, we don't have time. We make time for something we feel is of value. So I think when we say, I don't have time, it's kind of an excuse we're giving more to ourselves. And also, here's the other thing. This person probably expects most of the people they ask to say that, so they're going to have a good answer as to why it's really not going to take too much time. And when they do so persuasively, you're now in a pickle, because you either have to admit that you were fibbing, right? I really just didn't want to do it, and I fit right, and which is going to make them kind of have less respect for you. You're going to have less respect for yourself, and we all do that, before we learn, differently. It's the natural thing to do. Or in order to save face, you've got to accept this thing that you don't want to do. And again, I don't think that's productive either. So here's how we do it. Here's how we can say no in a way that honors the other person and maintains our integrity and our boundaries. We simply say to the person, thank you so much for asking. While it's not something I'd like to do, please know how honored I am to be asked. And that's it, because what you've done is you've thanked them. You've let them know it's not something you choose to do, or it's not something you'd like to do, but to please know how honored I am to be asked. And you're grateful that they would think highly enough of you to want you to participate. You're not making an excuse, though. You're not giving them something to hang on to. You're simply telling them no, that it's not something you want to do, but you're doing it in such a kind, tactful way that, wow, and I've had people thank me for the way I've told them no. And I've taught others how to do this. And they've also reported back to me that it's freed them up to be able to not be at people's beck and call and to maintain their own integrity. And, people thank them for saying no, for the way they said no. So that's really how a go-giver would do that. We would honor our boundaries, but we would do that respecting the other person.
Yeah, and still maintains that integrity, but then it's authentic, that right. You're being honest with them as well. Absolutely.
That's
great. Well, let's talk a little bit about mentorship and what's the best way for us to find a mentor. Maybe more importantly, what not to do when you're trying to find one. What's some ideas that you have on mentorship?
Well, mentorship's a great thing because when you have a mentor, an advisor, they can guide you and cut your learning curve time and really, provide you with confidence, knowing you've got someone there who can answer the difficult questions and guide you. The way I would suggest not to ask someone to be your mentor is to approach this person who hardly knows you and say, hey, would you be my mentor? Many people do that. And a mentor-protege relationship is just that. It's a relationship, and it takes time to form. And so I think it's very appropriate, though, if you know of someone, and again, this could be through any medium, whether it's email or social media or the phone, or that you happen to know this person because they live in the same town. It's perfectly reasonable to say to this person that, I'm starting a new business, or I'm just starting to so-and-so, what have you, and I understand you're very busy. If it wouldn't be too inappropriate, I would love to ask you a couple of very specific questions. And so what you've done is you've asked in a way that it communicates you don't feel you're entitled to it. You understand how busy they are. You've given them an out or a back door by saying, I understand you're busy if it wouldn't be inappropriate. And you're letting them know you're not going to take up a lot of their time with unnecessary questions. I would also make sure you Google or somehow, do your reconnaissance so that you don't ask them questions that you could easily have known the answer to. Yeah. Okay, you don't want to do that. You want to ask questions that wouldn't be. And then when they provide you with that advice, you thank them profusely. You let them know that you look forward to applying their information and that you'll keep them up to date and, you'll keep in touch. And I would send a personal handwritten note to them that very day, thanking them again for their time and mentorship and help. And then, another really nice step is to find out, again, online, what their favorite charitable cause is and donate a small check, $25, what have you, $50 in their name to that cause. They'll be notified by the organization. You're not doing it to kiss up to the person, but you're doing it just, again, to communicate that although you're not in the position right now to add the kind of value to them as they can add to you, you want to let them know that you are thinking of them and you are looking to be of value to them. And you might come back and again, a few weeks later or a couple of months later, what have you, with another question and go, and eventually over time, if it's supposed to happen, a mentor-protege relationship will be cultivated.
Yeah, I love the authenticity of that as well, that you're trying to build that relationship versus just being somebody, like you said, that's pulling on somebody else that's, not right. Kind of being pushy. So, exactly. That's great. So tell me, what habits do you feel in your personal life have been the most helpful for your success?
I would say that it's the habit of working on myself. Because, our biggest obstacles, our own character traits that don't serve us and don't serve others. And I had to work on these things. When I was younger, I sort of operated in many ways out of anger. I felt I gossiped too much. I repeated things or I spoke disparagingly of people. I, spent money foolishly. I just did things that, young people do sometimes and older people do sometimes. But when I was in my early 30s, I really started to recognize how these things were not serving me and not serving others. And if I was ever going to reach my potential, I was going to really need to work on myself. And I got into the habit of working on myself. I got one of the books that was very helpful to me was Ben Franklin, The Autobiography. And in his book, he goes through what he calls the 13 virtues, because Ben, as successful as he was, when he was younger, he had a lot of character traits that were getting in his way. And he knew he had to turn these weaknesses of character into strengths of character. And he put together a course for himself. As you know, he was an inventor, so he invented a self-improvement course. And it went over 13 weeks where he wrote down 13 areas that he wanted to improve upon. And the first week, he would work diligently on just the first one. The second week, he'd work just on the second one. The third week, he'd work on the third one. And after 13 weeks, he started over again with the first trait. Now, 13 times 4 are 52. So he could go through his program 4 times in a year. And by the end of that year, he saw a significant improvement in himself and in his character traits and in his habits. And I felt the same way. I found the same thing. And so that was, Ben Franklin, The Autobiography. There's so much wisdom in that book. It would be, a good book to be studied in a homeschooling home or organization, in my opinion.
That That is great. Well, and that's really what I love about this curriculum, making a difference. I feel like it's really, you could use it as a personal development guide to take notes as you're trying to make those improvements, because it's got so many wonderful pages on it that let you do that. But that's great. So tell me, do you have any long-term goals that help you work towards your legacy? And what do you feel like your legacy is going to be?
Well, my legacy, as far as I'm concerned, is to carry on my dad's legacy. My dad is a person who, despite coming from a very poor immigrant background, had a really good business that helped a lot of people. And he and my mom, who I think they're coming up on their 60th anniversary very soon. Yeah. And they have a wonderful marriage. They're such fantastic people. And Dad is one of these people who, if you want to call them people skills, was really second to none. And he always had a way of just making people feel genuinely good about themselves. And I've often said, and I think of my dad whenever I say this, that the single greatest people skill, because we know that people skills are very important. We would say that success in life, success in business is probably 10% talent or technical skills and 85 to 90% people skills. Okay. And to me, the single greatest people skill is a highly developed and authentic interest in the other person. And that's something I always saw in my dad. He was always genuinely interested in them. And I've often said that, when it comes right down to it, to the degree that we can make other people feel genuinely good about themselves, that's the degree to which we're truly adding value to the world. And so that's my idea, to carry out that legacy. I have a book that I wrote called Adversaries into Allies. It's based on an old Talmudic saying from the scholars, that question and answer that said, who is a mighty person? And the answer was that person who can control their own emotions and make of an enemy. And that really is, as much as I love the Gogetter book, that book, Adversaries into Allies, is really my baby. That's the one that to me is based on the teachings of my dad, just from observing him for these, 58 years.
Oh, that's wonderful. And that's hopefully that's what we're all striving to be, is a person who continues to learn and is able to continue to be master of his own situation. So that's great. And then before we say goodbye, do you have any final parting words for our listeners? And then please give us your contact information, how we can get in touch with you and hopefully be able to grab this book as well as the curriculum for that.
Well, first of all, as far as where anyone can contact me or get more information, it would be thegogiver.com. Without the hyphen, it would just be thegogiver.com. And while they're there, they can check out the books. They can scroll down. They can get a chapter or excerpt for free of several of my books, The Go-Giver, Go-Givers Sell More, The Go-Giver Leader, and Adversaries into Allies, which is the book I was just talking about. They can also subscribe to my podcast if they'd like. We come out with that every week. It's usually 18 to 23 minutes of value-based information, and they can connect with me online. So I invite people to come to thegogiver.com. Meanwhile, my suggestion for everyone, children of all ages, right? And that's all of us, is to just continue to learn, continue to grow, continue to look at ways we can improve ourselves and improve the world around us. And as long as our focus is on that, we're always 9 steps ahead of the game in a 10-step game.
Great advice. Thank you so much. And again, his contact information is thegogiver.com. However, we're going to be sure to link all that information that we've discussed today, as well as the books that he's cited, on our website as well. So thank you so much, Bob, for joining us and for helping us light our minds on fire.
Oh, thank you so much, Rebecca. I so appreciate you having me with you.
Thank you for listening to The Luminous Mind. To learn more about Bob Burg, go to our show notes at theluminousmind.net. Be sure to become a subscriber to our free email list and get our new monthly newsletter. Then check out the Services tab to see how we can continue to assist you, our fire starters. Also, to help us continue production of illuminating content, go to the Sponsor tab at theluminousmind.net. For more information on sponsorship and affiliate programs, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, Google+, Pinterest, and now Instagram. Get our free audio content by subscribing on YouTube, iTunes, and Stitcher. To help us grow, consider these easy ways. Tell your friends about us, leave us a review, share our content. Tell us how we can help you so together we can continue to light minds on fire and change the paradigm of education.